And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us. And one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it, and that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. Tonight I'm joined by Cate. Cate, thanks for coming on here and talking with me.
Good to be here, Brandon.
Would you like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself before we get into it?
Ha! Oh, God, okay. Typical human material girl for the first 30 years, then realized that was a dead end. You know, the mortgage, the house, the 2.5 kids, blah, blah. And so, I gave up the material route at that point at age 30. And, the only road left unexplored at that point was the road within. And so, I'd always been kind of turned off by religion. It always seemed kind of like strange to me, the attitudes that were put forward about humanity being so, lowly worms and all that. So that was a turnoff. But, I turned to spirituality and learned to meditate and followed a few gurus and thought I knew everything. Brandon, if you'd asked me, oh God, even 10 years ago, do you know about life, the universe and everything? And I would have confidently went, yeah, Brandon, I know about anything. Just ask me.
Yeah.
And, and then, of course, in 2020, COVID happened, and I got off my meditation cushion and popped my positivity bubble and looked around the world and went, what the hell is really going on? For 30 years in spirituality land, I'd been meditating and taught to leave my body and go into bliss, and that's where God was. Okay, and in the meantime, the whole world is going to hell. And I when COVID hit, that whole kind of they call it spiritual bypassing. And that whole spiritual bypass thing of, yeah, I can close my eyes and go into bliss, okay, and quiet my mind and ignore everything. But how healthy is that? And how is that helping me? And how is that helping humanity and the rest of the world? So, I think for a lot of people, COVID was a huge turning point for me, where I just looked at the world gone mad and went, well, yeah, what the hell is really going on? And that's when I started researching something that, being again in the spirituality, love and light brigade, I turned around and started looking at the dark. I started researching, well, what is evil anyway? And it was the exact opposite of everything that I'd been taught for almost 30 years. You don't look at the dark stuff. You want to be positive and filled with happiness all the time, because if you look at the dark stuff, then you're going to magnetize it to you. So that whole mindset had to go bye-bye. And so I started researching evil, and I was pretty doggone shocked at what I discovered.
I think 2020 was probably the year that a lot of people had like some great awakening just because of the way the world was.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm also a health writer. I was raised in a medical allopathic family. And so early on, I was pulled in two directions, Brandon. I was either going to be a doctor or I was going to be a writer. Well, what happened is I ended up choosing the writing path. I worked in television as an editor for a long time. Then I switched into journalism and worked as a newspaper journalist for a long time. And then I segued into writing books and editing books. So journalism is my background fundamentally. And so also when COVID happened, I write for a lot of alternative health magazines like Lynn McTaggart's What Doctors Don't Tell You, published out of the UK. And so I've been writing in the alternative healing field for 20 years. When COVID hit, the first thing I did was pitch my editor an article on, hey, how about an article on homeopathy for treating COVID? And this was in March of 2020. And she said, gave me the thumbs up. I researched, I talked to homeopaths around the world. I talked to one of the leading homeopathic epidemiologists in the world, Jeremy Sher out of South Africa. And by March, he'd already treated over 800 patients homeopathically for COVID with great success. I mean, everybody was up and on their feet and out the door 3 to 7 days later. And so I was like, oh, cool. Okay, we don't have to worry about COVID. And I wrote the article and supplied everybody with all the information on which homeopathic remedies to use for COVID, yada, yada, yada. And by the time the article came out in May, the world was in lockdown. And, and the governments were saying there's no cure, there's no treatment, just wait until you have to go to the hospital and then die. And I was like, wait a minute. Meantime, I'm doing other health articles talking to naturopaths and Chinese medical doctors and functional medical doctors. And every doctor I talked to who had, an alternative bent was going, yeah, we're treating with vitamin D. We're doing IV vitamin C infusions and it's working great. Nobody's going to the hospital. Everybody's getting over it. So that was when I just went, okay, conspiracy land, here I come. We're being screwed with. And so that's exactly why I did start researching the dark side. And what I discovered was I could track it back about 5 or 6 thousand years, Brandon, and every culture on every continent on this planet for thousands of years has had a name for a non-physical, very dark, interdimensional influence. The ancient Greeks called these mind parasites, actually, called them the archons, the evil whisperers who make men mad. The Tibetan Buddhists call them the hungry ghosts. Native American, the Iroquois Nation refer to these beings as Wetiko. Other Native American tribes refer to them as Wendigo. I live in Hawaii, and the Hawaiian Kahunas refer to them as the Eepa. I mean, even psychiatrists like Carl Jung, he was very well aware of this negative, parasitic, negative mind parasite, called it the antimemus, the antichrist energy and influence on this planet. So at that point, as I say, everywhere I looked, everybody, of course, the Christians call this, Satan or the devil.
I was getting re- I was getting ready to ask. I said it sounds like for like in the Christian viewpoint, it would be like the devil or demons or something like that.
Yeah. The Jewish call it Abaddon, Iblis. I mean, the names are legion. So, at that point, I was like, well, holy moly. Everybody knows about this. We've known about a dark force dragging humanity down into the mud and mire for thousands of years. That old image of the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other, whispering in the ear, vying for your soul.
Yeah.
That really wasn't that far off. And so my next question, Brandon, was that, I looked at, okay, everybody knows about this. Everybody has known about this for thousands of years. Everybody has a name and a description. Oh my God, I worked with shamans. I did a lot of plant medicine at a certain point in my life. And I was working down in the Amazon with a couple of shamans for months on end. And every shaman worth their salt who was traditionally trained, they knew about these dark entities. They knew about demons. They were very, very real. And they were blatant about removing negative demonic forces from people who did ceremony with them. And it was kind of like ho hum yawn. We've known about this for forever. It's about time the rest of the world caught on. So the next question I had to ask myself at that point was, well, okay, we all know about it and we've known about it forever. Why don't we know about it? You know?
We've heard the stories and have ideas, but no one actually knows. It's just all different names for the same type of energy or whatever it could be, this negative thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for God's sakes, I mean, how many Hollywood movies, starting with Linda Blair in The Exorcist in 19 whenever that was, 72 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Hollywood has depicted these beings forever. So it's not like it's unknown. So then I started going down the rabbit hole of, well, if we don't know about it, like, why? And it was because it's an interdimensional, non-human, non-physical presence that's been here, I don't know how many thousands of years. And so it wants to stay hidden. So the agenda, Brandon, is to stay hidden so that these entities can literally influence human beings. They are parasitic in nature. They feed on energy. As I say, they're parasites. That's why the Tibetan Buddhists call them hungry ghosts. They feed on people's light. They feed on their emotional energy. And the easiest emotions to stimulate in human beings is fear. Fear, rage, anger, jealousy, remorse, self-hatred, all of those yummy negative emotions that's very easily stimulated in human beings. That energy is literally what these entropic parasites feed on and live for. And they're not even from an organic, I've spent like 5 years at this point researching this whole subject, Brandon. And when I first started, all I could come up with was, well, okay, demons and devil, which is kind of scary to even use the word, but I couldn't think of any other word but evil for these beings. But as it turns out, a parasite just feeds, but they feed by lowering our emotional capacity, our emotional light. They don't want, they are horrified and run away from love and light. So the whole point is to make humanity lower their own frequency so that they become a feeding ground and an equal match for the energy signature of these interdimensional forces, intelligences. So I looked at back to the question of, well, why don't we know about it when everybody knows about it? It's, for one thing, religion is made, for example, Christianity and Judaism. You look at the image of the devil, of Satan, and it's pretty ludicrous, a big cloven hoofed guy with horns and a forked tail and red skin. It's like, okay, that scares me when I'm 3. When it scares me when I'm 30, thinking about it, if I thought about it as being real. But ever since the age of reason, and ever since the 1700s, when we started developing reductionism and the scientific method and started turning our mind away from superstitious nonsense, things like the devil, images of Satan, become ludicrous. And so we can skim over it and laugh and point fingers and go, oh, look at those poor stupid Christians who believe in that nonsense. And so we marginalize, out of our scientific arrogance, if you will, we marginalize this very real force and this very real presence. And again, these beings, these interdimensional beings, intelligences, they work through influencing mostly the mind and the emotions. Again, they're non-physical, so they manipulate us mentally and emotionally, and help and get us to create ideas and philosophies and religions and all sorts of things that end up keeping them hidden. Can I give you a really good example of how this influence works?
Yeah, sure.
So, if you look at the whole concept of original sin, I don't know. Are you Christian and familiar with this whole idea?
I grew up as a Christian. Like my family still goes to church and everything. I'm not a practicing religious person at all, so I don't really align with any sort of religion. But if I did, I'm familiar with the Christianity background.
Yeah, yeah. So Original sin, when I was introduced to that as a kid, it was horrifying to me to think that I was born sinful, that I was born corrupt, that I was a hideous, worm thing that needed to be cleansed in the blood of the lamb. I mean, my God, this imagery is horrifying. And you have to wonder, where does this kind of imagery come from? Anyway, so original sin, it was like, God, all you have to do is look in the eyes of a child, a 6-month-old baby. You look in those beautiful, pellucid eyes, and all you see is brilliance, life, and love. You don't see evil there. So it's such horse crap. And if you take 5 seconds to just really think about it and use some common sense, and as I say, look in the eyes of a baby and think about original sin and how stupid it sounds. But anyway, so where did this idea come from? Because billions of people over the last 1800 years, Brandon, have believed and been raised on the concept of original sin. And it's a horrifying, self-castigating, emotionally corrupting teaching that, we have to hate ourselves and loathe ourselves and hate our bodies and abuse our psyches because we're only worth abuse. And this has had a horrific emotional and psychological impact on humanity ever since the concept of original sin was introduced back in about 250 AD by St. Augustine of Hippo. And I mean, think about kids have self-esteem issues. The last everybody from Gen X onwards has been riddled with shame and self-guilt and lack of self-esteem. So we wonder where that comes from. If for 1800 years, generation after generation has been raised on believing that they are corrupt pieces of shit, excuse my French, and worth nothing, that have to be rescued from the flesh to, crawl on their knees to God to be worthy, to be saved. It's like, whoa, epigenetically, the emotional, psychological impact is incalculable. What this one religious teaching has done to humanity. So St. Augustine of Hippo, back in about 35 AD, actually, he was the son of a pagan dad and a Christian mom. And for the first 20 odd years, 25 years of his life, he was pagan and a sex fiend, a drunk. He was a bad boy. And his Christian mom despaired for his soul. And then one day, probably in a drunken stupor, Augustine staggers into a group conversation of a group of young men talking about the teachings of Mani, the prophet of Babylon, who was the founder of the religion called Manichaeism. So Mani lived about 100 years before Augustine came around. And Mani taught the teaching of original sin, that it was his whole understanding that we were corrupt at birth, the flesh is sinful, the earth is sinful, and you need to be, scourged and and baited out of that and made to be a good human being. So anyway, so Augustine stumbles into this teaching about original sin, and the light bulb switches on. He goes, oh my God, I'm not a bad boy. Oh, my body is bad and corrupt and evil. Oh, my body made me do these horrible, sinful things and drink and carouse and womanize and break my mother's heart. Oh my God. So Augustine, no longer guilt-ridden because it's his body's fault, converts to Christianity, sobers up, and becomes one of the founding members of the whole Christian church and one of the founders of most of Christian theology. And amongst that is the teaching of original sin, which he brought into the Christian theology. So ever since Augustine, 1800 years, we've been teaching original sin and reaping the horrible harvest of that teaching. Now, here's my point, finally. Where the hell did where did Mani, the prophet of Babylon, come up with this idea? Well, Mani said he was whispered to at night by a voice. A disembodied entity talked to him endlessly over and over about the corruption of the flesh and how evil the earth was and how horrible human beings were just for the fact of being alive. He didn't know what this voice was. He actually called it his other self. And he eventually was driven so bizarrely crazy by this voice that he ended up the prophet of Babylon and taught original sin that 100 years later Augustine comes along and picks up and runs with and introduces into Christian theology. Now, Augustine said that he was visited by an angel who told Mani the truth of the corruption of the flesh and humanity. Bullshit. Mani never said it was an angel. He said it was just this disembodied voice that plagued him endlessly. So that's how this interdimensional, non-physical, non-human intelligence influences humanity.
Now, it's kind of a hypothetical question. This obviously these whatever this thing is has been around for years and years. But do we actually have any idea, other than being like an interdimensional entity, where it actually stems from?
That is such a good question, Brandon. And I didn't come up with the best answer that I've found so far, but the best answer I've found so far, I heard from a woman by the name of Jacqueline Hobbs. She's a spiritual, I don't even know what she is. She's brilliant. She's referred to as Oracle Girl or oraclegirl.org. I'll give her a plug. I heard it from her that this interdimensional force actually came from a different source altogether, not the love, light, loving God, creator, life source that we know that is the foundation of organic life in this multiverse, if you will, but that these entities come from a completely different, very binary, very non-organic, non-living, actually, even as we know life to be. They're actually a non-organic, non-living parasite that doesn't exist as we do, but it feeds on organic life and energy. So when I heard that, when I heard Jacqueline say that, it was like all the bells and whistles in my head went off because, you were raised in the Christian church and dismissed a lot of this stuff just like I did. And the thing about, and I lost my track of thought. Shit, sorry. I totally spaced it. I'm sorry. Ask me a different question, Brandon.
Well, I was just wondering, like, from where this thing had originated from, if it's taken the form of all these different negativities throughout every religion or whatever, the central source of where it came from.
Yeah. Well, now thank you very much. I picked up my thread. So one of the things that I've never been able to wrap my head around, and probably pretty much any logical thinking human being has had a difficulty with this whole religious teaching about, if we go back to the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, the foundation of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, we're looking at two very different gods. The original God of the Old Testament is fundamentally psychotic, violent. I think the number people have added up the number of deaths and genocides, that apparently this God triggered and asked people to commit, and it's something like 30 million people back in the old days. So we've got the original Old Testament God, which is a violent, vengeful God. And then all of a sudden we have the New Testament and Jesus comes in and love enters the picture. And now we have a loving God. So I could never reconcile this bizarre bipolar situation where, wait a minute, got a loving God and we got a psychotic God. Okay, I cannot reconcile this.
I've brought this up, I think, before in another episode. It's almost like the one fire and brimstone, fear me God, and then all of a sudden when the New Testament came about, he's all happy-go-lucky God.
Yep. So this really has helped me understand that, because as I say, any rational human being cannot justify this weird juxtaposition. And so, spiritual people go, okay, well, the reason we have horrible, terrible things, evil things happen on the earth, like, child sex trafficking and satanic ritual abuse of babies and genocide. The reason we have that is because, yes, God is a loving God and we all come from love. And all of these terrible things also come from love, because everything comes from love. And it's because we've got to learn. We've got to learn to go beyond these terrible things so that we can get to love. There's all these twisted, really weird contortionist acts that we try to come up with stories to explain the unexplainable. I'm sorry, a group rape of a 6-year-old infant is not from a being of love. And it's not for any frickin' lesson for anybody to have to learn on this planet. And when I finally heard Jacqueline say that whole thing about this influence, this negative entropic influence comes from a non-living, non-love, non-empathetic, no emotion, binary code almost like source, it just clicked. And I went, oh, if we have that kind of influence, that's what drives people into non-loving, non-life oriented acts. We have been twisted and tortured and tormented for 1,000 years into becoming something that we're not. Because fundamentally, if we take the premise and go along with a God of love, a source of love, let's just use the 3-letter God word and leave it out of it, and go to source intelligence or universal consciousness or universal creative mind, whatever fired existence into existence. If that comes from a life source, life is healthy, Brandon. Life is growth oriented. We've been painted the picture of nature as red and tooth and claw and violent and terrifying. But again, how much of this influence is always trying to frighten us, always trying to turn us away from our own nature, always trying to make nature and life itself corrupt and bad. And the more I see this influence, it's like, oh my God, the whole story is to try to convince us that we're evil, horrible creatures ourselves. And yet, if we're children of God, okay, if we're made in God's image, I'm going to go back to the 3-letter word again. If we're supposedly divine beings, and then you look at the world around us today, is the world mirroring back that it was created by beings of love? There's a question in there.
Yeah, I know. I'm I'm contemplating the definitive answer that I want to give, but basically, no. If you look at the world through the lens of at least my perspective, the world is really screwed up, and
yeah, absolutely.
There's nothing loving about it. You might have instances here and there, but for the most part, the world seems pretty chaotic, and not from human standpoint. I feel like we're destroyers more than anything.
Absolutely. And we have been convinced of this for again thousands of years. We have been propagandized into lowering our own light, because if we are the children of God, if we are divine creators in our own right, I'm just throwing this premise out. If we are beings of pure love, and then we look at the world that we have created, how did that happen? Well, the only way it could possibly happen, if we go along with the premise that we are divine beings whose natural innate substance is that of love and life and health and growth and evolution and exploration and creativity. How did that get twisted into creating the shit show we've got now? We have been tricked. We have been influenced. For thousands of years. People like Mani, the prophet of Babylon, have been tormented by voices in the dark until they come up with twisted freaking teachings that they ram down generation after generation's throat until 2,000 years later, you've got generations and billions of people who think they're pieces of shit. And yet, truth be known, we are spirit. Quantum physics has shown us very clearly E equals mc squared. Mass and energy are equivalent. What we consider physical isn't actually even physical. There is no point particle. You can't take an electron microscope and dig and dig and dig. How deep can you go to find that one physical point particle at the bottom of the barrel? There is none. It's all energy. So, so even quantum physics is pointing the finger towards our actual essence, which is spirit, which is the movement of love and life itself, the creative principle. So something happened between the beginning of the beginning and where we are now. And so that was the end result of all of my, in a nutshell, the end result of all of my research, which came out and I present in my book, Cracking the Matrix, 14 Keys to Individual and Global Freedom. That was what I realized has happened is we basically started out, let's use the Garden of Eden. Forget the Adam and Eve and the loincloths and stupid apples and snake BS. But if we started out as loving beings, creators that are divine in nature, extending creation throughout existence and eternity, and then we become influenced, and then we become taken over by a dark, twisted, parasitic intelligence that is not of love, that only knows to feed and consume. Makes a lot of sense.
Now, I know I have a lot of religious people that listen to my show, and
Yeah.
I'll probably get backlash from most of them, but this is something that I actually find interesting because if anyone has ever listened to the show, they kind of know my stance on how I feel about religion. There's certain things that I've said before that don't add up to me and it makes me question things. But when it comes to religion, I feel like it is a means of control.
Absolutely.
Almost every religion out there has some sort of a story, and they're all similar to to a certain degree, but people cherry pick the context out of each one, and
Yes.
they align it to specific things that they value. So someone listening to this right now that say they come from a Christianity background and basically what we're talking about now would be something that they would not agree with because it goes against what they've been taught. But the problem, what I feel like that is the things that they've been taught could possibly be another means of control, and is an impossibility for someone to think that maybe what they're being told is, again, that negative influence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with religion and there's nothing wrong with spirituality. The thing of it is that even the most brilliant love teaching can be twisted. For example, let's just look at the symbol of Christianity. A dead man crucified on a cross. This is what people worship? And we come together and kneel at an altar and drink this man's blood? Who thought this up? It is grotesque. This beautiful ceremony, which is about imbibing the essence of the Christ, which is the light and the purity of the human divine spirit, the divine spirit of the divine. That is what we're supposed to be ingesting, but it's been overlaid and twisted with this demonic, quite frankly, vampiric imagery. So that we try so hard desperately to rise up in our own light and in our own innate love nature. But everywhere we turn, there are images, there are ceremonies, there are words that we say, and prayers that we invoke that create the exact opposite, and we don't see it. You are exactly right. Even the most pure of the pure has been polluted and twisted, and we haven't done it. We have been tricked into doing it to ourselves.
And I guess
Go ahead.
the other aspect to this is the people that are listening could say the same thing about what you're saying to us now too, is maybe they're going to say that you're the negative influence and try and persuade. See, that it's almost like the double down, like they're going to reinforce their beliefs because that's just how we're programmed as people. Like no one likes to get uprooted, so we buckle down and hold tight because this is where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hold tight to the deck chair as the Titanic sinks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the very fact it's actually just makes me weep that when I was a little girl, or just again back to that looking in the eyes of a little child, purity, beauty, Sweetness and love. That's what you see. That's the unspoiled human. That's our nature. That is our innate nature. And then everything else happens. Then we get taught that we are despoiled and horrifying bad creatures. We're taught from the first words we can imagine and even hear that we're vile and despicable. Well, who's going to, after 18 years of being taught such stuff in at church and from your parents and then you go to school and then you're taught you have nothing to do with God. There is no God. You came out of a slime mold, that crawled onto land and developed legs, and then you evolved out of an ape and you're just an advanced blob of protoplasm, and all your neurological functions are just physiological, and there's no consciousness and no love to you whatsoever. You get inculcated with all of these disparate, very highly negative, really demeaning, demoralizing teachings year after year, day after day, your whole life. What else are you going to think but that you're a piece of crap? That's the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
And then because as you think, so you create, right? I mean, you don't have to be a new age spiritual person to think that we manifest, out of our belief systems. And if I think I'm a pile of poo, I'm just going to act like that. And I'm going to be constantly trying to navigate myself from an illusion out of into another illusion, rather than, wow, why is it so hard to even imagine for a moment that we're divine beings, that we're an extension of God, and that our true nature is love?
One of the biggest things for me is, at least with the religious aspect for Christianity, years ago, we had to watch something called Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames. And
Mhm.
I know that's the big shock thing for a lot of people, but to me, it rubbed me the wrong way in the sense of how it was being put on and the things that were being said. And you'd mentioned we're born into sin. So basically, a newborn child is already damned to hell because they were born into sin. They didn't have a choice. They didn't do anything, but they're automatically a sinner. So if you listen to what they were talking about in Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames, if you were a great person, you did everything you could, but if you happened to do something and you sinned, but you didn't get a chance to ask for forgiveness and you got killed, you were
Yeah,
going to hell.
Gandhi goes to hell because he doesn't believe in Jesus, because he's a Buddhist.
Everyone goes to hell because they either didn't believe in Jesus, or if you sinned and you didn't ask for forgiveness before you died. I was like, well, what happens if you went to church, you happened to do something that was considered a sin, and you weren't even aware that it was a sin, and all of a sudden you spent your whole life trying to be this great person, but because you screwed up once, apparently, you're damned to hell? Like, what type of a forgiving God and all wonderful God is that if that's the case? Because that's how this was being produced to everybody.
Absolutely. Oh, what kind of twisted, sick teaching is that? And where did it come from? That's not a God of love. That's not a teaching of love. That's an abomination. That's a twisting of everything that's normal, natural, and real.
That's what never
And
had set well with me because, and that's, to be 100% honest, why I don't follow any sort of teachings, because I feel like it has been pushed to the point to where no matter what you do, it's never good enough. And then if that's how it's really going to be, why are
yeah,
we
why
even here in
bother?
the first place? Why bother? Because if God really created everything and he knows everything you're about to do, he knows the outcomes before you even decide to do it. He had to create, quote unquote, the devil and evil. God created everything. So therefore, everything that's existing, spiritual, outside of spiritual, any of that stuff, if he created everything, he already knows what's going on. So what is the point?
Yeah, exactly. And this we have to become contortionists, emotional and psychological contortionists, to be able to go along with these very, very childlike, very superstitious, very twisted teachings. And again, there's nothing wrong with religion. I mean, Jesus, everything he stood for. What did he say? The kingdom of heaven lies within. He didn't say, "Oh my God, you have to struggle and strive because you're a piece of poo, and the kingdom of heaven is outside of you. And if you do all X, Y, and Z, you're going to enter the kingdom of heaven." He never said that. He said, "Go into your closet, look inside your own heart, and it's there in you." It's like, wow, okay. His whole life was an example of who we really are. He walked it, talked it, and chewed the gum simultaneously. He was this, the Christos is the shining example of who we really are, left unmolested by negative entropic forces and negative teachings that twist truth into something unreal, turning us into the bad guy. Again, original sin, you're born into sin just because you're born. It so yeah, it's finally when I researched all this, Brandon, it was like, oh my God, all of a sudden a lifetime of religious and spiritual teachings made sense because it was all the twists all made sense. And if literally we are, I don't know if you saw the movie The Matrix, very few people haven't in the Western civilization. But we really do live in this false paradigm that we have created. And as I say, if we are these, if we are children of God, left to our own devices, we would never create the world we've created. It's not in us as children of God. A child is like the father and the mother. And so there's this huge slip betwixt cup and lip, going on. So when I finally saw, and the glow, here we go. If you want to ask me what the hierarchy on this planet is, it's the invisible controllers, these interdimensional beings, which have literally taken over and possessed certain human beings. And we call those certain human beings the kings and queens and the popes and the highest of the high globalist elite, the wealthy, the rich, the global elite. And from there you step down into religious hierarchy, and from there governmental hierarchy, and then you've got everybody else's foot on the throat of the masses. And it's this hierarchical control mechanism that's been put into place that is taking us to where we are now, where we're looking at, quite frankly, and we probably don't have time to get into this, and I'm still formulating it. But the more I look at this whole concept of there is another source, which begs the question, well, my God, if there's more than one source, of creation out there, and it's not all pretty, how many other sources are there? But I'm not going to go.
Mhm.
I'm not going to go there. But it's like it opens up vistas that we've been locked in a very small dark box for a very, very long time. And I've been the more I look at this parasitic intelligence is very binary, it's very cold, it's very AI like, quite frankly. And it's fascinating because I've looked at the trend of science over the last, especially the last 100 years, and it's all about learning how to replicate life. We study the genetic codes, and we're at the point where we're trying to create life in the lab. We create synthetic medicines. You don't take the herbs anymore. You don't eat the peppermint or the spearmint or the herb from the field to take care of yourself. No, we have to synthesize something chemically in the lab. So the last 100 years or so, scientifically, we've been moving more and more into a synthetic reality. Well, now we've got AI, speaking of synthetic reality, and the creation of cyborgs and putting lace brain implants into human beings so that we can hook up to the Internet of Things. And I look at this, and this robotization that is so like the emulation of this parasitic intelligence that has no actual life force to it. And it's like I've looked at the last couple 100 years of scientific endeavor, and coincidentally, it seems as if, strangely enough, not to be a conspiracy theorist or anything, that we are being guided into creating a very low-level synthetic intelligence that these non-physical beings can actually finally embody in, which is the whole point. is to get us. We're the hands. We're the hands. These are disembodied, disincarnate beings. They can't pick up a pencil. They have to get us to do all the dirty work. They have to convince us to lower our own light and to create a corrupt system out of our own self-corruption.
Do you
And when they do that, they finally get us to the point where we have synthesized ourselves and lowered ourselves and roboticized ourselves and snuffed out the light of life and love itself so that we are finally a match for these entities and they can enter and have the life they've always wanted and lusted after?
This is a rhetorical question, but do you believe that maybe these things were something that we created years ago?
No, I do not. And and at the same time, I keep noodling this idea about which came first, the chicken or the egg. Which came first, these oddly synthetic parasitic entities, or it's almost like they seed or they are the seed of AI. It's bizarre. And then what does AI then create? I don't know the chicken and the egg to this. So I will say no, we didn't create it, but I think we're being maneuvered into creating the potential seedbed of more of the same. So yes. So in a way, the answer is yes. We haven't done it yet. It's not in the past. It's in the future. So I
It's one of
But
those,
I-
it's almost like
Go
a
ahead.
paradoxal type question, like, because if it's something that we did in the past and we're living in it now, then the movie The Matrix is basically we're all living in this simulation to where these AI are controlling everything and we're experiencing the world in a bubble because we're being used as a food source for whatever these things are. But
Yeah.
if you look at it in that context, if these things are a synthetic binary code, it is like AI in the sense of that way. So something would have had to create it. So what created it? If there's another source that created that and we're a completely different source, but they need us for some purpose, then what would have created? Like
They
what?
feed on organic life,
Yeah.
apparently,
So
so they can replicate.
the whole context
how
is
this
we're
all
the
got
food
set
source.
into motion and when, I have no idea. How many trillions of zillions of years ago this was, I have no idea.
Yeah, it just the concept, and again, I've heard people say that, well, this was never ever talked about until that movie came out. And, well, where'd they get the idea for that movie at? It's just some.
Yeah, there's so much out there in Hollywood land that is a precursor, and if you go along with the whole satanic idea about things, is you've got to warn people up front about all the stuff we're going to do to you, so that we have so that you're complicit. If you have knowledge, you're complicit, and then we're off the hook karmically. So I'm sure you've run across that whole story about as far as the satanic
Yeah,
warnings are concerned.
they have to let you know what they're about to do.
Yeah. Well, and so, but what I'd really like to do is before we end the conversation is shine a light on how much hope there is, because I mean, if we ended the conversation now, it would be like, shit, why don't I just go out and kill myself? Because
Right.
what's the
Very, very doom and gloom. I was actually
yeah,
gonna,
yeah,
I was gonna ask you a question though, like,
Yeah.
your book with the 14 keys. Is that something
Yeah.
you would like to talk about before?
that's exactly where I'm headed.
Okay, that's fine.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we're going to have to at least accept as a potential that maybe we are children of God. Let's just use the three-letter God word, that we are children of the divine, and that our nature, our true nature, is love. Okay, if we take that premise, then and that life itself, nature, which has been demonized, just as we've been demonized, is the nature is satanic, nature is the devil, nature is the corruptor. And it's all, the whole imprint is to turn us away from life. Go into the virtual reality room, stay on the computer, stay hypnotized on your phone, disconnect from each other, disconnect from love, disconnect from nature, disconnect from life. Why is that the message? Because Life is of love. Life is healthy growth, evolution, creation. It's a joyous, ongoing evolution rolling like thunder through all of existence. So if we align ourselves with nature, if we get, one of the many of the keys and things that I talk about in the book is, well, okay, what the hell am I going to do with this, with this influence? How do I change my mind and all this lifelong programming I've been subject to? It ain't simple, and yet it is simple. It's like we have to learn to trust the love within us. And we have to learn to realize that it's even there. And this is a big, major journey, and it is humanity's turning point. Because if we turn back to the love within us and do what Jesus said, seek the kingdom of heaven within. So what I do is I've meditated for 30 years trying to get out of my body because that's what the whole spiritual prompt is. You got to get out of your horrible limiting body to get out there to God where everything is good. Okay. Same thing. It's different twist on religion. It's the same dynamic, body bad, heaven good. We go back to E equals MC squared. Mass and energy are equivalent. There is no such thing as physicality. It's all spirit. Everything is spirit. And if you go so far as to say everything that spirit is love itself, the life force itself, the creative movement itself, when we align with that, we start moving back into health. Our bodies start to align with nature's rhythms, which are all about life, not death, not crucifixion, not VR, get out of your body and just go curl up and not be in touch with anybody. I mean, I something like 60%, Chat GPT and the AI relationship programs have been officially out for 3 years now. And already 60% of young people are hooked into AI relationships, love relationships. They don't care about hooking up with a human being and holding hands and walking down an autumn lane together. No, they're too busy hooking up with an AI program. So it's all this move to take us away from nature, take us away from life, take us away from holding each other's hands and cradling each other in love and tenderness and some mutual support and community. It's all about division. So over and over, I suggest to people to align with life. Take 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, more than that if you can manage it. Take your shoes off, turn your phone off, leave it in the house. Go out and sit under a tree for 10 minutes. Breathe. Feel how your body feels. Let it soak up the natural health, the electrons and all of the good vibes from the earth. Let your breathing regulate. Kids with ADHD, soldiers who've come back from the horrors of war, suffering from PTSD. Clinical study after clinical study shows you get these kids, you get these soldiers out into nature, and their body starts to regulate. The anxiety leaves. They start to blossom in their own being again. Their bodies begin to heal. Their psyches begin to heal. And so love is life. And it's in us and it's in nature. So aligned. So more and more, I just, God, if you can be quiet, turn off the frickin' phone, stop watching the news, go out in nature, be as quiet as you can with yourself. Learn to help your neighbors. Find, who needs food, who needs help. Reach out a hand to those who are in trouble, and pretty much everybody's in trouble. And if we don't turn to one another, Brandon, which is the whole goal, is to turn us away from one another. So, it's about being quiet, getting into nature, and unhooking from the horrors that are being shoved down our throat all the time, and rediscover ourselves as the loving children of the divine that we actually are. But this is a journey we have to desire and uncover for ourselves. And when we do, then the burden, when I finally got, Brandon, that I wasn't a piece of crap And the age old guilt, just it didn't matter how much I accomplished in my life, how much money I made, or how many meditation hours, or how many books I wrote, or how many people I helped. It didn't matter because underneath everything, there was always this underlying, I just feel guilty for being alive. And when I finally researched this presence and understood its agenda on this planet and how it affects us and why it's doing what it's doing and why we feel the way we feel about ourselves, when I got that I wasn't a piece of poo, it was like taking a 1,000-pound gorilla off of my back. And I was like, oh my God, it's not that I can't do wrong. It's not that I'm not subject to stupid, emotions. It's not that I'm never going to accidentally hurt anybody, but I'm not a bad person. And when I finally got that, Brandon, it was like, oh, all of a sudden I could breathe. All of a sudden it was like a lightness came into my heart and a gentleness came into my hands and my step. And I began to be kinder to myself and to other people. But we can't get there flagellating ourselves, hating ourselves, and seeing ourselves as the devil itself. That's been the mirror and that's the trick. And when I saw the trick, it has changed everything.
I think like for people to understand this, they have to do a lot of self-awakening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that might be a problem for some people, but I think the truth for finding that though, you have to look within. So that's the journey that we all have to go through is we have to find the answers within ourselves.
Yeah, we do. And there's a lot of dark, shadowy stuff that's in us because of how we've been raised and programmed. But underneath all of the programming and all the dark, scary shadow stuff, there really is pure love and light in us.
Mm-hmm.
And again, back to look in the eyes of a child. But again, Jesus said that you have to be as a little child to come into the kingdom of heaven. Of course, you have to go back to your true love nature, which is how you were born. It is who you really are.
No.
So when we start to trust that and we look in the mirror and we see beauty instead of horror, then that's the road path. That's the salvation. That's the road back to love and us creating the new heaven and the new earth that has always been prophesied. But we've got to move out of the darkness of the matrix of the delusion of what has been pulled over our eyes.
That is one of the things that I've always kind of questioned is how much has been told to us and how much has been fed to us. And a lot of it is just, again, like I said earlier, just another means to control us. And I think what you've talked about tonight is definitely one of those aspects to it.
I would say pretty much everything.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, even the teachings of Christ have been twisted so that instead of focusing on his love and the simpleness of be like a little child, enter your own heart, instead we look at a bleeding body on a cross and think all we can think is human beings are cruel and we killed Jesus. We killed God. I'm a bad person. It's all twisted. So, when you say how much is out there that is feeding us the lie, I would say about 98% of everything that we witness, aside from the loving acts of other humans, the kindness that makes you rescue a kitten or sacrifice your life to save a child and pull them out of a raging river. Human beings are incredible. The levels of self-sacrifice that we will go to help one another is astounding. We are beings of love. We've just got to really dig deep and trust that it's there until we can find it ourselves.
That I agree with. We can probably wrap this up, but before we do, I want everyone to know where they can find your books at.
Sure. The book is Cracking the Matrix, 14 Keys to Individual and Global Freedom. It's on Amazon, or you can order it through any bookstore. My website is catemontana.com, and that's Kate with a C. And I also have a Substack where I do weekly or bi-weekly writing, and that's cmontana@substack.com.
If you send me links in an email, I will copy those links and put them in the show notes for anyone listening.
Cool. Thanks. I'll do that, Brandon. Yeah.
I definitely appreciate it. And honored to have you on the show here tonight. It's actually been one of those conversations that I've been interested in having because it touches base on a lot of things that I've already felt and kind of
Yeah.
believed in. So it aligns to how I feel a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad it's been a meaty subject for you, and that and I hope people, yeah, oh my God, there's so much hope and so much beauty in us. We've just been assiduously trained not to see it, but it's there, you know?
So this definitely aligns to how I see things because I've been saying for a long time for anyone that's listened to the podcast that I know and feel that there is something out there. It's like a negative energy type thing that feeds on us, and I don't know what it is. I can't describe it, but I just know there's something out there that influences everything, and this aligns to that.
Yeah. Yep. I'll send you an EPUB.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions before we close?
No, I think I've got everything for tonight. So again, I appreciate you coming on here tonight, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great. Brandon, thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you very much.
Aloha.
Good night. If you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, or you can also go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Just make sure to reach out and get a hold of me, and we will get something scheduled for a future episode. You can also find Tinfoil Tales on Facebook and Instagram. Just look for Tinfoil Tales Podcast. You can reach out to me that way too. Remember to share the show around. Word of mouth is the best way to help the show grow. And just remember, truth comes at cost. Are you willing to pay the price?